But one thing we did say that we were going to do last week was that we were going to address the two types of atheists. So we're not going to get involved in the debate about the definition of atheism. What we are going to do is address you have your lack of belief atheists and you have your belief gods do not exist atheists. So Dave, Dave and I are both belief gods do not exist atheists. But did you want to take away this one on how, if you were just a lack of belief atheist, you would address the position?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd go with just a lack of belief. I'd go with the does not believe God exists sort of Anthony Flew idea, rather than just describe the psychological state. You describe a psychological state, but by taking a position on the actual kind of proposition itself.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'd agree with you on that. I think a lot of so again, even when you think about a lactheist, if you want to call them that, um, they describe that in different ways themselves. So some of them will only lack belief, or some will say, "No, I don't believe," and they will admit it's an answer. So, as you said, if you want to take away one that, like Flu's work, I don't believe in gods, or I don't believe gods exist.
yeah, I'd go more for something like that. And one of Flu's things is that it's separated from agnosticism, because to use agnosticism is to say that the agnostic thinks that the claim in the proposition is still something worthy of consideration, whereas Flu's idea was that the atheist who uses does not believe God exists isn't allowing for that. They're saying that they've considered it, but they consider it false. They just don't believe it, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and there is good sort of thinking that can come from that, in that it kind of goes back to the whole sufficient justification for belief.
Oh, we lost you again. We've lost you a few times recently tonight, Dave. Um, I thought we were gonna manage to skip past this today. um,
And it would be a better. Oh,
yeah, you're back.
I've just cut out for a while, haven't
You
I?
did.
Uh,
um, I don't know why it's happening again. It seems to come and go, doesn't it? I do apologize.
Usually, as soon as we start streaming,
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Actually, when it stopped streaming the other day, it was perfect for ages. I think maybe it could be a case of, as I mentioned before, my computer's getting on a bit. I will be buying a new one once I've sold the house, and we'll see if that can that handles it a bit better. Maybe there's just too much going on for it. I mean, it doesn't look like it is. I'm barely using any RAM and only 14% of my processor, so it shouldn't be, but who knows? We might also try not using Discord and try using the Google Meet and see if that works any better as well. So anyway, I do apologize for the cutting out. Um, so you just jumped into the flu saying that it's a more active don't believe than only lacking belief.
yeah, in that it's actually taking a position. But unlike the agnosticism, where they're saying that they've considered it and they haven't made up their mind, the blue sort of atheist, they've considered it and they've made up their mind, in that they don't believe it. They don't believe God exists, but they don't hold the idea that God does not exist.
Mm.
Sort of. It seems like a silly distinction, but it's there. And it sort of comes from the principle that we should withhold belief based on, insufficient evidence, unless we're convinced. I know it seems a bit of a tautology, because what convinces us is what convinces us. Um, so it is slightly different, but it still uses that epistemic principle that we should withhold belief until given sufficient justification and reason.
Yeah, it does seem a bit like epistemic agnosticism.
Yeah. And I hear Atheists using this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, well, I'm just withholding belief until such and such a time. They could go with flus and they would have a similar sort of justification to give. And they could then give that justification in an argument to convince other believers, start a conversation about sufficient evidence, about sufficient justification. Um, and they could say, this is why I do not believe. Whereas,
Yeah, whereas is where you've ended up again. Let's quickly catch up with the chat whilst Dave is frozen again. I do apologise. Leon, thank you for telling Philip about the stream. Most appreciated. Yeah, I am going to keep my eye on both the chat and the everything like that, Leon. Yes. Yeah, you're back.
yeah, I'm going to try quitting out and coming back in.
Okay.
Just to see if that helps with anything.
Yeah, cool. Hopefully it does. So whilst he's going on, LB says, ask Ozzy, as an atheist philosopher, what do you get tired of hearing atheist activists all the time? Yeah, it depends on which activist. You're right there. I mean, Ozzy, for a question from us whilst we wait for Dave, is there a particular activist that you especially like and an activist you especially dislike, and why? LB, be careful. The restream bot doesn't like all caps. Just for your advice, it will eventually punt you out if you keep doing that. The Maverick says, "Why would you withhold belief if said belief benefits you and has not been proven false?" So, I mean, what end are you going on there? Are you why would you hold the belief the proposition is true, or why would you hold the belief the proposition is false? there's I would think that depending on what's convinced you is where you would be, and if you're unconvinced, that's why you would withhold belief, one way or the other. Ozzy says he gets weary hearing people parroting horrible counter apologetics quite uncritically and constant burden shifting, all while they boast how they're such great free thinkers and critical thinkers. Yeah, that's a very, very, very common one that frustrates me as well. Definitely. You're back in the room, Dave.
Yeah. Not sure for how long, though.
Now I've got to try and remember where you were.
Yeah, no, it's not that. But basically, the idea was that Atheists could use this idea to actually branch out and give their version of the burden of proof or the burden of justification by arguing that they take a particular epistemic principle, which is the withholding of belief, and then they could use that to springboard into an argument to try to convince the believer why they should hold that epistemic principle. So there is an argument that can be sprungboard too for the sort of weak atheism idea from that, rather than from the lack of belief thing, which is just burden of proof isn't on me. I just lack belief. I don't have to counter your nonsense arguments. All that kind of stuff.
Mm. Yeah. So again, I suppose it depends on why people are having these discussions. If the Lactheist is actually out there to have an honest conversation, that should be what they are trying to do, rather than sort of just going.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just. It keeps cutting out, and I'm losing rhythm and kind of everything. Yeah.
Typical, absolutely typical. Ozzy also says an atheist activist I would recommend would be Dr. Stephen Law. I would definitely agree with that one. I remember you introduced me to him probably only a year ago, and I bought his book for my son, and I really enjoyed the book. And yeah, he's great. I love reading his articles, the way he writes and explains things. He can make topics that are quite dry seem really, really interesting. He's got a good knack for that. Um, Aaron Ra and his ilk are an embarrassment to the atheist and critical thinking movement. Yes.
Yeah.
um, yes. Anyway, so using say Flu's negative atheism position. I think that's what he called it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What
But you
would
can
you
call it weak atheism, negative atheism. It's the same thing.
what would you um say the best couple of justifications for holding that position would be?
The sort of epistemic justification, where you're withholding thing, I think that's probably one of the best ones for it. It works equally well for agnosticism, and I suppose it just depends on what label you want to be called by and by what definition. But it is a pretty good reason for not believing God, in that you haven't been presented with enough sufficient justification.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that works for me. I don't know. I think you and I both feel that we have had enough justification to actively disbelieve, though.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think most atheists, even the Atheists, do. They just, for some reason, they're afraid to dip the toe in the water, afraid to go against these main kind of thinking that goes on within the group, where it must only be this and you must respond with it's not my burden of proof, all those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to hearing a lot of misinformation that, holding an active belief means you have a burden of proof. And therefore, if you have a burden of proof, they think, again, the misunderstanding of you have to prove it true. So they say, I mean, there was even that atheist I quoted on, I think it was on the article I wrote called "Do We Atheists Have Burden of Proof," where she actually admitted that I would never say I believe gods don't exist, even though I don't, because a belief is a claim, and that means I have the burden of proof.
Yeah. All sorts of good convoluted arguments.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to speaking about critical thinking, a lot of these people do call themselves critical thinkers. And as critical thinkers, you would think they would be happy to take on that justification for showing their belief, because that's part of what critical thinking is.
Yeah, again, that comes down to a misunderstanding of critical thinking and just being critical instead,
Yeah.
and a misunderstanding of skepticism and just doubting or being a denialist or a cynic.